Is there anything that's theoretical that you're aware of that could be applied, like from some other planet or some other galaxy or whatever, something that maybe we have theorized that could be responsible for the way these things are able to move?
Well, when I talk to my friends who are physicists like myself about these things, they sort of laugh, giggle, their eyes roll up to the heavens, and they say something very simple, that a rocket using conventional means would take 70,000 years to reach us from the nearest star. Therefore, these objects cannot exist. 70,000 years for a Saturn rocket traveling at 25,000 miles per hour to go from a nearest star to the planet Earth. That's why most scientists disregard these sightings, because they defy the laws of Einstein.
But isn't that kind of silly? Isn't that kind of like saying, you can't, you know how long it would take you to get a horse from Los Angeles to Sydney, Australia? Isn't that kind of like saying that?
Exactly. And that's why I say that assumes that these aliens or whatever are maybe 100 years more advanced than us. But open your mind to the possibility that they are 1,000 years more advanced than us. 1,000 years is nothing compared to the age of the universe. The universe is about 13 billion plus years old. That's how the age of the universe. And so the age of a civilization, just a few thousand years ahead of us, that is just a blink of an eye to the universe itself. And once you go to higher energies, the laws of physics begin to break down. And we actually found evidence of something that may look like a type 2 civilization, though that's very, very speculative. There's something called Tabby Star that decreases in intensity by 20% periodically. Now that's incredible. Stars don't simply diminish by 20% in intensity after a few years.
It's intermittently?
Intermittently,
it comes back?
right. So the theory is that maybe there's a Dyson sphere. A type 2 civilization creates a sphere around the mother star to absorb all the energy from the mother star. That's called a Dyson sphere. And so the thinking was that maybe a Dyson sphere is orbiting around Tabby Star, diminishing sunlight by 20%. It's 20% reduction in starlight in a star, which is unheard of. Now, if a planet goes in front of the mother star, sunlight diminishes by less than 1%. If Jupiter goes in front of our sun, starlight from our sun diminishes by 1%. But 20% reduction in starlight is incredible. That's why some people think that's evidence of an intelligent object orbiting the star, diminishing starlight by 20%.
What is your take on all this UAP disclosure stuff? Do you give it any mind at all, or are you busy with real stuff?
UAP is the modern scientific term instead of UFO.
There's a thing called the Fermi Paradox.
Yes.
Named after Enrico Fermi, a Nobel Prize physicist and a member of the Manhattan Project.
So let's say trillions of planets in the Milky Way. The Milky Way's been there for over 13 billion years, pretty much the age of the universe. If there's no one else out there, then the question is why? Because there's been so much time and so many places for civilizations to become spacefaring civilizations.
Right.
A landmark study published by NASA and the SETI Institute suggests that there are at least 300 million potentially habitable planets in the Milky Way.
So the first thing to say is, I would not be surprised, right? If a UFO landed here now in the parking lot, I'd actually, not only would I not be surprised, I'd be relieved, actually.
Do you believe there is life elsewhere, or are we alone in this incredibly vast and silent universe?
Is it possible that there's something that exists that evolved in a way far different than us, that has access to intelligence beyond what we think is possible?
According to Michio Kaku, this is what makes human intelligence predominant.
First is the opposable thumb, a manipulation device. Second is predator eyesight. Predators are smarter than prey. Predators have to scheme, they have to stalk, they have to have camouflage, they have to deceive, which is much more difficult than that of a prey, which simply has to run. Third, language. And then you ask yourself a simple question. How many other animals have all three? An advanced language, opposable thumb of some sort, and stereo eyesight. Well, we're the only game in town. But that doesn't mean that in the universe, there couldn't be other situations with different combinations which have these three ingredients.
Here comes an object from outside the solar system, and it shows anomalies. The scientists would say we should be as careful as possible at talking about anything other than a rock. Now, they say that when they know that humanity launched a lot of space junk, a lot of technological objects to space, and we also know that there are 100 billion stars like the sun in the Milky Way galaxy alone. Most of them formed billions of years before the sun, and there are billions of Earth-Sun analogs. And so it's quite likely that, we are not the first one. Sorry to break the news, Elon Musk was probably not the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang. And therefore, we should consider the possibility that things like us existed long before us. And that means that all these civilizations that had their history initiated billions of years before ours could have done it. And all we need to do as responsible scientists is to check if among all the rocks that come from outside of our backyard are really rocks, or maybe one of these objects might be a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor. And the editor said, no. The paper will not get published unless you remove that sentence.
Is the scientific paper system rigged?
3i Atlas is 1 million times more massive, at least 1 million times more massive than Oumuamua. Right. And I immediately, as it was discovered, it was July 1st, and I realized, wait, that doesn't make sense because we should have seen millions of Oumuamuas before we saw this one. It's so big. And I also realized there is not enough rocky material per unit volume in interstellar space to deliver such a giant rock into the inner solar system within a period of a decade. You would expect it at the very optimistic scenario once per 10,000 years.
Right.
And by the way, this paper I submitted for publication, that was July 3rd or something. Then the editor said, the paper is fine, but you have a concluding sentence at the end where you say, well, unless the object is smaller than estimated, maybe it was targeting the inner source. That was my solution to say, one way out of this dilemma of why is it so big is if it was targeting the inner solar system by design. And indeed, the trajectory is aligned with the plane of the planets around the sun to within 5 degrees. And it's moving in a retrograde trajectory opposite to the motion of the planets, which is ideal for it to release mini probes that will get into the planets. It gets close to Mars, it gets close to Jupiter, it goes on the opposite side of the sun relative to Earth when it's closest to the sun. And that's the time when a spacecraft could do a maneuver to take advantage of the sun's gravitational assist. All of these are interesting indications that may imply that some intelligence designed the trajectory. So I had one sentence at the end of the paper saying, maybe the trajectory was designed. And the editor said, no. The paper will not get published unless you remove that sentence.
Wow.
So now when you listen to comet experts that say, well, this claim or that claim was never published in a peer-reviewed journal, guess what? They are the editors or the reviewers who are blocking the discussion on possibilities. And I think it's inappropriate, especially in the case of alien technology, because it could be a black swan event.
The Planck energy is 10 to the 19 billion electron volts. That is a quadrillion times more powerful than our most powerful atom smasher outside Geneva, Switzerland. Any civilization that can harness the Planck energy would be able to become masters of space and time. Space and time as we know it become unstable at the Planck energy, which is far beyond anything that we can muster here on the planet Earth. So, we physicists theorize, how advanced do you have to be to access the Planck energy? Well, we rank them. The Kardashev Scale says that there could be type 1, type 2, or type 3 civilizations. A type 1 civilization is maybe 100 years more advanced than us to maybe 1,000 years, sort of like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon. They control the weather, volcanoes, earthquakes, anything planetary they control. That's type 1. Type 2 is stellar. They harness the power of an entire star, like Star Trek. Star Trek would be a typical type 2 civilization where they manipulate entire stars. Type 3 is galactic. They roam the galactic space lanes. They play with black holes. The Empire would be a typical Type 3 civilization. Then the next question is, what type do you have to be to harness the Planck energy? The energy at which space and time become unstable, where wormholes may develop, gateways through space and time, portals through empty space. You have to be type 2 or most likely type 3. Then the next question is, how long will it take before you become type 3? Well, we are maybe 100 years away from being type 1. We're maybe a few thousand years from being from type 2, and we're maybe 100,000 years from being type 3. And 100,000 years is nothing on a galactic scale. The age of the universe is, as I said, over 13 billion years old. And so once a civilization reaches the Planck energy, that is a type 3 civilization, space and time become your playground.